Well, I am very pleased then to introduce to you Cemil Betanov. He's one of our members. He's been with us for several years, and he was just telling me in an email, not too long ago, that he had started a stamp club with a couple members in Long Island. As big as that is with many people, and he just said it was really tough getting that thing going, and that's a shame because there's so many people up there, and I think a stamp club would go well. But Cemil is the editor of the EFO Collector. That's the Errors, Freaks, and Oddities group in the publications, and also maintains its website, and that's HPPS, this EFOCC.org. And if you have any questions, he's the one. I'm sure Dave Hunt can help you too, because I know, Dave, you're involved in that as well. In addition to that, he is a member of the Lancaster County Philatelic Society, Postal Stationery Society, American Topical Association, and United States Postal Stationery Society. He collects newspaper wrappers, art on stamps, enjoys sharing what he has. Cemil has a rather demanding daytime job working in information technology and specializes in cybersecurity. Cemil has been shared several sessions with us here at PLC on a host of topics, and we'll come away learning something new. So with that, please join me in welcoming Cemil to the group. Cemil, do you want questions during or after? Can't hear you.
If it is a short, like a clarification or something like that, feel free to interrupt me. But if it will cause some conversation, then it's better to hold. Can you hear me?
That sounds good. Yep. Okay. And we will
okay.
go
I'm going to share now
share
my screen
with us.
Tell me when you can see it.
Perfect.
So you can see. Yep. Excellent, excellent. So I'm going to talk about newspaper wrappers once again, this time by categories of their overprints. So, newspaper wrappers get overprinted like other postal stationery and stamps. So it's a good way to classify, you can classify different types of overprints, and I'll get into that. So I had started to put together this presentation, but then I came across an article by John Curtis of the Postal Stationery Society. And I'm sorry, his article was in the UPSS, in Postal Stationery, the UPSS journal. And it was so much overlapping that I feel like a plagiarist if I don't mention that a lot of this, of the material, is very parallel to what he has. So I want to recognize his contribution here. It's not completely the same. I have some differences. So it's there is also my contribution to it. So I hope that if he sees this deck one day, he doesn't say, gee, he stole all my ideas. So anything that I will show you is from my personal collection. Just that's important. So I'm going to go by categories about why the types of overprints. So, and I will provide examples of each. So the major categories are surcharges where denomination is changed. Then you have pre-cancels. You have when the entity name is changed through the overprint, when the overprint denotes a purpose, and then you have specimens. So we'll spend some time looking through each one. So I want to go, to get started by saying what I will not cover. So when you have a newspaper wrapper, as you see here on the left side, companies or third parties will often print their logos, their corner cards, and so on. And those are private additions that I will not cover. So I will cover things that basically are applied in a quasi-official you know, format. I will also not cover perfins, because perfins are applied later typically by the entity that owns the material, the wrapper or the stamp, whatever it may be. So I'm not going to cover that either. Now, here, one more thing that clarification I want to make is you are looking at two newspaper wrappers, and to you they may look quite similar in the sense that both of them have two indicia or two stamps printed. The right one, the Danish wrapper, to me is an overprint. And why? Because first this wrapper was issued with a single indicium, and then postal rate changed, and they added the post office added a second indicium. As a matter of fact, you can see here that they are of different intensity, so they were applied separately. So to me, I consider the second one to be an overprint. Others may differ in their interpretations. When you look at the left one, which is a British wrapper, here you have again two indicia, one for halfpenny, one for 1 penny, and they were printed at the same time. So the post office, basically, people would hand in their wrappers, their paper to the post office, and the post office would print whatever denomination they wanted on the wrapper, and then they would print on that their company name, address, and whatsoever, and they would use it. But for all practical purposes, the two indicia were printed basically at the same time. So to me, that's not an overprint. It's a regular wrapper. So I make the differentiation, and we will see more cases like the one on the right as we go forward. So the first category is the surcharge, a change in denomination. As you see, there are two indicia, two stamps cut out from wrappers, basically. These are not physical cutouts, they are digital cutouts. So I will show the wrapper in a minute. And there are two main reasons why they would apply a surcharge on a wrapper. One of them is the postal rates may change. Like, for example, this one, if you look, it's a 1 penny stamp, and on top of that, the surcharge says halfpenny. So apparently the postal rate went down, and they didn't have any use for the 1 penny ones, so they put the halfpenny surcharge. Alternately, sometimes if they had multiple denominations, say some denomination would be used up, other denominations would stay in the stock, and instead of printing new ones, they would take the one that was still in the stock and they would just apply an overprint in order to change the denomination and use up existing stocks. So those are the two main reasons why you might have a surcharge. So I will show a few examples from different countries. This is a Barbados in the Caribbean. It's the postal rate obviously went down here from 1 penny to 1/2. Actually, it's yes, to 1/2 penny. These are the Victoria wrappers, the Australian colony, basically. They were very prolific in applying surcharges. On the left, you have again 1 penny to 1/2 penny, and the same on the right. What you see on the upper right there is not really directly related to our subject of overprints, but I just thought it really looks nice. These Australian wrappers, they have particularly unusual and nice watermark. So I just wanted to show the watermark, but it's not strictly related to our subject here. The overprints would be applied in several different ways. These are Cyprus wrappers, and the overprint was applied with a hand stamp. That's very common. On stamps, you don't find as much, the usage of hand stamps to apply an overprint, but wrappers are big and they are more inconvenient, and once they are cut apart, it's difficult to put them in a machine and apply an overprint automatically. So very frequently for wrappers, you see that they use hand stamps to apply the overprint. Now, these are Danish wrappers, and there are actually 3 different types of overprints here. Let's start with the left ones. The left one is basically the postal rates changed, so they made it 5, and I'm now hard pressed to see what was underneath. Underneath it was a 3 euro wrapper, and they applied a 5 euro overprint to change the denomination. The middle one, it was started life as a 5 euro wrapper, and then the postal rates changed. Apparently, they added another 1 euro stamp, so it became 6. The rightmost one is the most interesting one, I think, because it has 2 overprints. The first one would be, well, it started with a blue stamp, and it was a 4 euro stamp of indicium. Then they added a 3 euro indicium, which became 7, and then apparently the rates went up once again, and they applied another 5 euro overprint to the indicium at the right. So this is double overprints. There are a few instances of double overprints in general, so that those are kind of, I think those are kind of fun. It shows the inconvenience a postal administration is willing to go through in order to use existing stocks instead of printing just a new set of wrappers. Of course, at the time that this happened, the paper was, I guess, more valuable than it is now. Now here, it is a surcharge in the sense that it changes the denomination. But what is interesting is the original Gibraltar wrapper was on the left a half penny, on the right a 1 penny. The red one is a 1 penny indicium, but the surcharge is in centimos, in the Spanish currency, rather than the British currency. So this actually both changes the denomination as well as the currency of the wrapper. So there are various reasons why that may be possible, and I have additional similar examples, and I will go into more details with further examples. This is a Mauritius wrapper that was overprinted twice. First, it started life as a 3 cents. It was overprinted for 4 cents. Then I guess they changed again the postal rates. They reduced it again to 3 cents. So this is a fun one. Unfortunately, I couldn't get my hands on one that has just the 4-cent overprint, but that's another story. In New Zealand, they had a slightly different condition. In New Zealand, as well as in many other countries in the British Empire, they had on the wrapper an instruction box or instructions that specified for what essential the wrapper could be used. It typically indicated that it can be used for printed materials. And we will see additional examples of that, but what is special about the the New Zealand wrappers is that they put the price also into the instruction box. So when they changed the denomination, they had to change it in two different locations, which makes it harder, obviously, to apply the overprint. And you will see at the top one, as you see, they didn't bother to put 1/2. They just covered up the denomination, the value. At the lower one, they went through and they changed the previous value of, I think it was 1.5. They changed it to 2. This is a Romanian wrapper where the wrapper was 1.5 bani, and then the postal rate was changed to 1 ban, and so the overprint was applied. Although not directly related to our subject again, this one shows actually how these wrappers were often printed and sold. They would be typically printed in larger sheets and then cut apart. In some cases, the post office would sell uncut wrappers, and then the customers could take them and cut them apart and use them. So this is an example of that. These are Swiss wrappers that have been overprinted, surcharged with new values. And the left one is basically a regular overprint, although the color is kind of unusual because it matches the underlying indicium, basically. On the right one, what is similar to the New Zealand wrapper, the Swiss, they also printed how much the wrapper would cost to the buyer. And the indicium value and the cost to the buyer would be different. On Swiss wrappers, they are different because I guess the Swiss, they felt that having this whole wrapper saves the buyer, the client, some money because he doesn't have to supply his own paper. So therefore, they charged either 1/2 or 1 centime extra. And so when they upgraded when they surcharged the wrapper, they had to also to update the cost to the client from 8 to 6 centime. Now now we are coming to the second section, which are the pre-cancels. So pre-cancels essentially, I'm not going to get into a lot of detail, but pre-cancels is when the post office essentially applies a marking so that usually during the printing phase of the wrapper, or before it gets sold to the client, to the end user, and then having a pre-cancel indicates to the postal service that no additional canceling is required at the time that it is mailed. That can save to the post office that has to do canceling a lot of time. Think about it, if somebody shows up with 5,000 items that they drop off there at the post office, it saves a lot of time not to have to cancel 5,000 items at once. So a number of countries used pre-cancels. Here are some examples of US pre-cancels. They look mostly very similar to pre-cancels that are applied to stamps, at least the lower ones. And the On the upper right is kind of interesting. This is a wrapper that has been commercially used, but for philatelic reasons, really. Stanley Gibbons was a philatelic publisher, and the pre-cancel is kind of different here. It doesn't have a town name or anything like that. It basically obliterates. What indicates to me that this is a pre-cancel is that because if you are looking at this left one, you see that there is this marking which says essentially section so-and-so PL and R for postal laws and regulations. And here you see there is also the same kind of overprint that has been applied. So this indicates to me that that is a pre-cancel. Now these are Austrian pre-cancels. In Austria, the post office used pre-cancels only for one single organization, and that was the German and Austrian Alpine Club. This was a club located in Vienna, headquartered in Vienna rather. However, they had lots of members, and most of them actually lived in Germany. They had also some members in third countries, but they mailed twice a month their publication to their members, and they mailed fairly large numbers. And when that was, of course, an inconvenience for the post office to have to cancel all these large numbers of publications that were dropped at the, at the post office. So they looked for ways to optimize the delivery, and they came up with the idea of pre-canceling the wrappers and then giving them, and then the organization would wrap them around their bi-monthly journal and send it back to the post office. Now, if you are looking at the middle, I have two complete wrappers basically. The top one, it looks like exactly like a regular circular day stamp, like a regular cancel. However, this is a pre-cancel. Now, before they started to use pre-cancels, they did use regular cancels. The reason why we can tell that this one is a pre-cancel is because if you look carefully, the address label is on top of the cancel. So that means that the cancel was applied first, and then this cancel wrapper came to, or pre-cancel wrapper came to this organization. They wrapped it around their publication, they applied their address label, and they send it back to the post office. Another way of knowing that it is a pre-cancel is by the date. It is well known at which dates they use regular cancels and when they started to use pre-cancels. Eventually, these applications of these cancels became also too much of a hassle, even though it might have been easier than canceling the wrappers containing their magazines. They essentially printed the pre-cancel along with the indicium. And however, the date was initially applied separately. If you are looking on the top right one, you will see that the date indication and the Uni 1917 is much darker than the pre-cancel. This is because it was applied separately. And actually, there are instances where, say, the date indicators are shifted compared to the pre-cancel and to the indicium. So one last thing I want to say about this is that if you look on the left side where there are four croppings of these indicia and precancels. These were from wrappers that were sent outside of Austria, and essentially they mimic regular stamps. Whereas if you look on the column at the right of the three indicia, those were sent to addresses out within Austria, or rather I should say within the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and those use Austrian newspaper stamps, basically. They mimic Austrian newspaper stamps. So my takeaway is that I guess the newspaper stamps were not recognized outside of Austria, so they had to use indicia that mimicked regular stamps. Here
Cemil,
I want
a question on that, where it says Mit Juni and Ende Juni. That was basically a kind of a wide space, the middle of June, the middle of May, the ending
Yes.
of May. Okay.
Yeah, they had it. Yes, they had, as I mentioned, they mailed their magazine twice a month, in the middle of the month
Mm-hmm.
and at the end of the month. And
Okay.
as luck would have it, yeah, this is the end of the June, right? And this is the middle of October 1910. And this is the end of June 1917. At some point, after the Anschluss, at some point, they stopped using the date indicators altogether. So if you are looking at this one, there is no date indicator. That's not an omission. They just stopped using them.
Mm-hmm.
And one remark that I finally would want to make is that sometimes they, if the magazine was thicker than expected, they just applied another indicium, or you have also cases where they apply just another adhesive stamp to an existing wrapper. So you have all kinds of variations in the use of these wrappers. It's quite interesting to collect them. So these are on the lower two rows is actually the complete set of the indicia mimicking regular postage stamp that was sent for wrappers that were sent outside of Austria or the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And then the top, there are four indicia that mimic newspaper stamps. I have to tell you that the ones used within Austria, that mimic newspaper stamps, are actually much harder to come by. And unfortunately, I do not have yet a complete set of those. I'm on the hunt, but you find them very rarely. These are, now this here is a pre-cancel on wrappers of the Cape of Good Hope, which is South Africa. And it looks like more like a regular cancel, but this is indeed also a pre-cancel. And also in Austria, there was only a single organization that used the pre-cancel. This was the Argus Publishing House. They published newspapers, and you find, the Argus Daily Edition was a newspaper, and then there was the South African Star that was also published by them. And you find the same pre-cancel used also on those. Those are rare, actually. And if you look carefully on the right one, let me see if I can make this a little bit larger. So if you look here, actually there is a date indicator, October 92. The other one doesn't have a date indicator, but otherwise the structure is the same. It's always an A in the middle, which I kind of have to assume that it stands for Argus, and it is indeed pre-cancels. There are also studies that show the development, the evolution of this pre-cancel. These are Canadian pre-cancels. They use them very frequently over the years. On the left is, on the lower left is Elizabeth II. Then you have the other two, the one showing the complete wrapper, the Barclay wholesaler, as well as this one. Those are George VI. And then here you have George V, I believe it's George V. And this is also a pre-cancel, and some Canadian collectors may disagree with me, claiming that this indicium was never used on a wrapper. But I have a counterexample. It was used on a wrapper. So that is a separate subject for another day. I published recently an article in the British Postal Stationery Society Journal about an article about this specific wrapper and the pre-cancel. It's quite unusual. Now, these are pre-cancels. They look also like cancels. They were specifically made and used for a newspaper called Stamford Mercury. And believe it or not, this pre-cancel was used over an almost 100-year period from 1878 to 1973. It's mind-boggling that it was used so long. And another thing that I find amazing is that, you would expect over this period, the pre-cancel would have substantially changed, and there are variations. But what I find amazing is that the variations are so small, you almost cannot tell them apart. So it's mind-boggling that they were able, I have to assume, to manufacture this pre-cancel over the years while maintaining all the fonts and all the other artifacts of the pre-cancel. It's amazing. So there are, these pre-cancels are quite common, but they were used over a number of wrappers, and some of them are harder to come by. Now here, this is another type of British pre-cancel, where these are actually quite common, and when you look at them first, you would think they are regular cancels because they look like regular cancels, but they are pre-cancels and they were used on newspaper wrappers. I haven't read anything yet about how they were manufactured, because usually, like if you have a pre-cancel, you would expect that, this gets pre-cancelled in some location, that in some official location where they have the pre-cancel, then they get shipped to the place where they are used, right? And there they essentially wrap the newspapers around them and ship them out. But this has a date and time, date stamp. So I'm wondering whether, for example, this wrapper, the wrapper where this is from, the lower right cancel is from, whether it was canceled on the 4th of August 1890, or whether it was canceled ahead of time and it was shipped actually on August 4th, 1990. That I haven't been able to determine yet. At some point I'll get to the bottom of this, but I haven't done that yet. There are lots of things that, can be studied on these wrappers. That's what makes them interesting. So this completes the pre-cancels. Now we are getting to a subject that I find somewhat more interesting, that is also kind of more unusual. It's more interesting because it has more history in it. It is where the overprint changes the name of the entity. So you have a couple of examples at the top, and we'll go into details, but the left indicium at the top left is from a French wrapper. It says République Française, but it is overprinted Algeria, so it's clearly a French wrapper overprinted for use in Algeria, which was a French colony at the time. The upper right two, they both indicate the use of in Morocco. The left one is on a German indicium, on a German wrapper, and the right one is on a Gibraltar wrapper. So we'll get into that in a minute, but let me say that the main reason was because there were multiple postal systems in Morocco at the same time. So every operator of postal systems had their own overprints. So let's start with US overprints. The US overprinted US wrappers for use in Puerto Rico and in the Philippines while they were operating the postal administration in those areas. Just for completeness, there are no such overprints for Cuba or for the Canal Zone because they got their own wrappers. Both of them have wrappers with indicia that say Panama or Cuba, so there was no need for an overprint. But Puerto Rico and the Philippines got overprints. Here is the French wrapper again that is overprinted Algeria that was issued in 1924. Now, these are wrappers, British wrappers, that were overprinted British Bechuanaland, which was basically a colony or a protectorate, probably. So, they are interesting because there are a number of varieties in the overprint, so they are interesting to study. There are also forgeries of the overprints. One thing that's interesting, though, is even though these wrappers are overprinted British Bechuanaland, these are British wrappers, but these overprints were done generally, not always, but generally in London. And so in London, they would, they need to send wrappers to British Bechuanaland. They are not going to print British Bechuanaland wrapper. I guess probably the volume didn't justify that. So they looked around and they overprinted whatever they had in hand. So here you have Cape of Good Hope wrappers, which is in South Africa, again, Cape of Good Hope. They are overprinted British Bechuanaland, and I have to assume that this also was done in London. I'm not positive about that, but these wrappers were in general printed in London, so it would make sense that they would have printed there. So my guess would be that they had these stocks in London, and when a request came from British Bechuanaland to send over some wrappers for postal use, they overprinted whatever they had at hand and they send it. So this is a Gibraltar wrapper, well, a Gibraltar overprint on a Natal wrapper, which again, Natal is also in Southern Africa. So again, another case in point that they overprinted whatever was at hand, and they send them for use. These are India wrappers, British India wrappers, overprinted Naba state, which was one of the princely states. There is probably about half a dozen princely states that had British India wrappers overprinted for their use. These were overprinted actually at the government printing office in India. They were not overprinted in London. And they are actually quite rare, or I should say scarce, not rare, but scarce. This Naba state is a little bit better than the others the others are almost impossible to find. I don't have hold any hope that I will find them, but I keep looking. As you can see, this is actually, oops. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You will see that it is quite a sophisticated overprint actually. And it is I guess you find this theme, this also on British wrappers, but in the thing here it says Naba state, whereas on British wrappers it would have something like God and my right or something like that in French, which was the slogan. Dave Hunt probably can provide a better explanation for that than I can. So, but anyway, it's interesting to find that on this Naba state wrappers. This is here a case of a Egyptian wrapper overprinted Sudan in French and in Arabic. These are now South African wrappers that are overprinted Southwest Africa. And these overprints were done locally, and you can kind of tell. What is interesting is that all these overprints are from the same year. So I guess the printer couldn't decide what font to use and how to spell Southwest Africa, or in which language for that matter. So, or it wasn't important, so, but the varieties are amazing. Now, we are coming to another case where we are going to look at the wrappers used within the Ottoman Empire. Now, you might know that at the Ottoman Empire, you had half a dozen competing postal systems operating side by side. There was a British postal system, a French postal system, an Austrian postal system, a German postal system, a Serbian postal system, a Russian postal system, and even, I believe, a Romanian, not Serbian, but Romanian, I believe there was one. So the major ones were the Austrians, the French, and the German ones, and the British one. So this is an Austrian wrapper overprinted with 10 para. Para was the Turkish currency used at the time in the Ottoman Empire, and they overprinted them for the use in the Ottoman Empire. if you look at this, actually the cancel here, that's also kind of interesting because it says Constantinople, which is the name used at that time for Istanbul, which was the capital of the Ottoman Empire at the time. And it says Austrian Post here, Österreichische Post. Now here are wrappers used within the Ottoman Empire at around the same time by the German postal system. And you know that it is a German postal system because these are German wrappers bearing German indicia. You see that, for example, this one, the three that are kind of similar are the Germania symbol that was used a lot on German stamps at the time. So, and the three left ones have each one 10 para. Now you may, if you look at the right one, there is something that's kind of unusual. It says 5 centime, and you will probably recognize as centime being the French currency. And you are saying, you might say, what the heck is the French currency doing on a German wrapper that was sold in Turkey? Now that is an interesting story because it shows you the wonders of competition. So what happens is the French, they might have sold French wrappers that using French currency at 5 centime. So if you walked into the French post office in Constantinople or Istanbul, you would buy, say, 10 wrappers at 5 centime each in French currency. The Ottoman Empire was really very much a free-for-all. You could use multiple currencies side by side. So you could, if you walked into the branch of the German post office, they would sell you 5 wrappers and they would say, this is 50 para, 5 times 10 para. So suppose now you are a small business and you are going to mail 500 wrappers. So you wake up in the morning and you say, okay, I have to take my 500 wrappers to the post office today, or I have to go to the post office, buy 500 wrappers. But let's say that just as luck would have it, that day, the French currency was lower in value than the previous day. And so really 5 centime were less than 10 para. So you had an opportunity to do some arbitrage there. You could take your Turkish currency, exchange it for French currency, go to the French post office and buy the wrappers and save some money. So this is, for that reason, there are not just the German post office, but the Austrian post office, for example, had similar things. At some point, they became non-competitive when they were selling, say, here in Turkish currency or the Austrian in the Austrian currency of Heller. So the way they dealt with that was by printing wrappers or overprinting wrappers in the French currency, because the French currency apparently was losing value and the French post office was more competitive. So people would essentially go select a post office that they wanted to use and buy their stamps and wrappers from there at the cheapest possible price. So that's interesting side note of history, and I think that's quite interesting that that was possible at the time. This is an example of a British wrapper overprinted for use in the Ottoman Empire. It's overprinted Levant, and Levant was a name given to the Ottoman Empire at the time by European powers. And so these wrappers are kind of interesting because the British also, when they overprinted these, they use various fonts and sizes of fonts. So there are plenty of collectible varieties. Now we are getting out of the Ottoman Empire. It wasn't just the Ottoman Empire or Morocco that had postal systems set up by other countries. China was the same thing. So here you see Russian wrappers that have been overprinted in Cyrillic characters with the word China. So these were used essentially in China. Now here we come back to the Morocco agencies rather to Morocco. These are the British, this is the British postal system operating in Morocco, right? And the Brits overprinted their wrappers and their stamps with the words Morocco agencies, and the local currency, they didn't use the local currency, they used the Spanish currency of centimos when they in Morocco. It was handier to use to overprint the Gibraltar wrappers because there the currency was also already the correct currency. But I guess if they ran out of, they didn't have enough Gibraltar stocks of wrappers and stamps, then they resorted to using straight British wrappers. This is the other postal system operating within the country of Morocco. It was the German postal system, and I'm not quite sure, but it's the first decade of the 20th century that these were used in Morocco. And you will notice here that the currency is also in centimos, which is the Spanish currency. Now, here is another reason why the entity name would be changed. Cilicia was a territory that is on the Mediterranean, just south of where Turkey ends today, and north of Lebanon. It is a small geographical area. After World War I, the French were essentially assigned a mandate to govern Cilicia for the interim, and they took Turkish stamps and wrappers and they overprinted them in French with the word Cilicie, which is Cilicia in French. So there are two wrappers, I have only one of them, that were overprinted as such. If you look at this, it is actually a very simple overprint. They use several different fonts on the stamps. On the wrappers, as far as I know, they use only this font. But it is a very simple font that is on top of it is very easy to fake. And the Ottoman wrappers, they are not expensive. So the Cilicia wrappers are more expensive. So there are lots of forgeries going around. I wouldn't be able to tell you for sure whether this is a forgery or not. Hopefully it is not, but this wrapper is not expensive enough that it's worth expertising at this point. So I do not know if it is a forgery or not, but I'm kind of hoping it is not. If it is a forgery, it is very similar to how they were overprinted. So this is another case where it is an unusual situation. This is during World War I. A general at the Eastern Military Command had these overprinted, and these went through the postal system and are basically recognized as postal artifacts, but they were overprinted on the order of one general who was, I guess, running that area or that command. And as far as I know, all the postally used specimens, they were sent either to the general's wife or to a friend of his. So they are very clearly philatelic in nature. This is the Russians. At some point, they set up a state in Siberia, basically, eastern Russia, that's called Far Eastern Republic, and they overprinted wrappers for use in that. Most of the known wrappers, I have never seen a used wrapper of Far Eastern Republic. I don't know if there are any used examples, but as far as I know, these are recognized as official overprints. This state survived a relatively short time, as you can see, 1920 to 1922. So I'm sure that if they exist, postally used wrappers, as well as the stamps, would be very scarce. These are wrappers that were overprinted during the Mexican Revolution, various geographical areas in the 1914-15 timeframes. They are overprinted wrappers, Mexican wrappers that were used before the revolution. They overprinted them to use to indicate their own geographical, areas. So you see, there are about, I'd say, roughly 9 or 10 areas that issued wrappers. Here you see 4 of them. So the next thing is the wrappers that denote a purpose. This is the first example is where wrappers, the overprints denoting a purpose. The first example is that the overprint for South Australia, OS stands for official service. So a general purpose wrapper is used to denote official use. This is a bit of a mystery to me. These are local Shanghai wrappers, Chinese wrappers that were used postally. They are overprinted with overprint 1843, Jubilee. I couldn't quite figure out yet what Jubilee it is, but at some point I'll figure it out. This is a French wrapper that is overprinted annulé, which means as much as cancelled. They overprinted with a hand cancel wrappers and stamps that they use in the schools where they trained postal employees. So essentially, these wrappers were overprinted for use for training purposes. this is an interesting one. This is an official valid, well, at least before the overprint, valid, regular Canadian wrapper. Now, it is overprinted with service, and as you see, and actually this is an EFO or an error because it has overprints, multiple overprints that are shifted. So it this is actually relatively scarce compared to the regular ones. You can find more easily the regular ones, but I don't have a regular one, which is just overprinted, you know, with this symbol and the word service, and some writing at the lower left. These were not official overprints. At some point towards the end of the 19th century, there was a rebellion in Canada called the Real Rebellion. You can Google that. And there was one guy who was a stamp dealer who happened to lead one of the groups of soldiers who were fighting to suppress that rebellion. So being a stamp dealer, it is known not exactly when, but the suspicion is that after he returned from service, he had official wrappers overprinted and with service, implying that those were for official military use of the particular group of soldiers. These are bogus because they are not officially overprinted. However, to muddy the waters, some of these actually did go successfully through the mails. So one could claim that there is an official angle to it, although generally the approach, the view is among collectors is that these are basically bogus issue and are at best interest as a curiosity. So now we are coming to specimens. Now, specimens were used for a number of reasons, and I will go into details of each one. There is a large category. The largest category probably consists of UPU samples, but also they were used, they sometimes wrappers and stamps are overprinted to distribute as printers samples or to give samples to potential purchasers of wrappers, or even to distribute unused postal artifacts to collectors, but they don't want to sell them, but they don't want those to be used later in the mails, so they might overprint them as specimen or sample in various languages. So now we start with US specimens. Actually, US specimens in general on stamps are much wider in scope and purpose. For wrappers specifically, there are a couple of use cases. The one that you see on the left and on the right was in general distributed to potential purchasers of wrappers to show them as samples so that they would know what they are ordering at the time that they are ordering it. And obviously the post office didn't want those who were giving out the samples to use them as in the mails, so they would basically write cancel on top of them to make them unusable. The one at the right is also the same thing. The one in the middle says bidder sample. I haven't read up a lot about on this, but I get the impression this may be some sample that a bidder may have given to the postal service during the bidding process of when the post office was selecting a printer to manufacture and print these wrappers. One interesting thing that you may notice here is that the wrappers in the middle and on the left have all canceled or specimen printed right smack on the indicium. The one at the right doesn't have that. It has specimen printed under the indicium. In theory, that's okay because the US Postal Service never authorized the use of essentially cutouts, wrapper cutouts, or postal stationery cutouts on mail. So you really couldn't cut out the indicium from this and stick it on a regular envelope and send it through the mails, indicating that this was the stamp. In other countries, you could do that, but in the US, you couldn't. So it was really material that whether the indicium was canceled with an overprint or not, it couldn't be used. These are also US specimens that were used on that were made for the War Department. These wrappers were used for official purposes, typically by the military and so on. Well, War Department implies military. There are no wrappers that I'm aware of for other government departments. There are specimens, but no wrappers that I'm aware of. The only wrappers I'm aware of are for the War Department. The Brits also had wrappers and had specimens, and in their case they just applied what looks like a cancel. They have other types of overprints as well. This is, I guess, the most, since I have it, is probably the most common one. The specialty of this wrapper is that if you look at the shape, it's actually a rectangle. British post office wrappers are usually have angled tops. At the top, the two corners are cut off. However, at some point, the British Post Office sold whole sheet of these wrappers to customers who wanted to overprint them to make the overprinting easier. And then whoever purchased them, they would overprint them and then cut them apart. It was, their printer's job to cut them apart. So it is the fact that the top corners are not, cut off means that this was essentially obtained from cutting apart such a whole sheet. And obviously the post office didn't want this to be used for postal reasons, since probably they were given to printers so that they could train their equipment on printing the wrappers correct on overprinting the wrappers correctly with the company names and corner cards and whatever else they printed on these wrappers. These are Colombian wrappers, and these are what are called UPU specimens. The UPU specimens, the UPU stands obviously for Universal Postal Union. It was really the transnational organization that really made global mail possible by having countries recognizing the postage applied by other countries. Now, suppose that you are sitting, I don't know, in British Bechuanaland, for argument's sake, and you are receiving mail that has a stamp from, I don't know, St. Vincent in the Caribbean, or a wrapper from St. Vincent in the Caribbean. Sitting in British Bechuanaland, how are you supposed to know whether this wrapper is genuine or whether the stamp is a valid postage stamp? That was a serious issue at the time when, communications were very limited. So the way the UPU solved that is that every country that issued stamps and wrappers and postal stationery would send samples to the organization's headquarters, and for each member country, they would send 3 samples. So if for example, the UPO had 170 members, the organization the postal authorities of every stamps would have to send 510 samples, 3 times 170 examples, to the headquarters of the UPU, and the UPU then in turn would distribute those to the individual member countries. So that is how specimen stamps were used at the time, and these were generally overprinted in the original country that didn't want these wrappers that were distributed for free to be used for postal purposes. I mean, it's a far-fetched idea, because imagine that they sent from St. Vincent 3 wrappers that ended up in British Bechuanaland. Now, what does it take to take these 3 wrappers, bring them to St. Vincent to mail them again somewhere else? So it's a far-fetched, but countries went to extreme to make sure that their freely distributed postal material couldn't be used without paying for it. So these are Colombian wrappers, and they were overprinted with the word oficio. These are Australian colony wrappers, in this case New South Wales, and they were overprinted specimen. If you look carefully, the right one, the overprint, looks inverted, and it is inverted, but for this one, I have never seen an example of this overprint that is not inverted. So my thinking at this point is that all the overprints applied to this particular wrapper were inverted, but I haven't, I'm not sure if that's for a fact the case. Another Australian colony, South Australia, had really some fancy ways of indicating specimens. You can see that they had here a wavy way of printing specimen on the right, on the wrapper on the right, and the left one, they had nice red letters The one in the middle looks more conventional. Now, these specimens here are this type of overprinting was used by far in most countries where the stamps was supplied by the British Empire. These are wrappers generally printed in London, and the overprints were also printed, and they all look kind of similar. They are not identical, but they are generally similar. The overprints vary in type of specimen. So for example, if you look at these ones, you will see that the wrapper on the right, which is from Palestine and was at the time administered by the British Post Office, at least the postal system, has a very different font than the others. There are other wrappers that are of the same type that have very different fonts. And also sometimes the direction or the angle at which specimen is printed varies. So again, you have also in this case plenty of varieties that you can collect just to satisfy your collecting addiction. Now, this is an Ottoman Empire, an Ottoman wrapper that was used in the Ottoman Empire, but it is it looks similar to the it looks similar to the specimens that I showed before from the British Empire, but this is not a British Empire specimen. The reason why it looks similar is that the printer was also located in London, so presumably copied something very similar to what was used by De La Rue that was also located in London. These are Argentina specimens. They are overprinted muestra. And let me say that these are quite common, actually. And I'm almost tempted to think, I don't know if these were used as UPU specimens. Some might have been. I'm tempted to think that these were either given out as samples in large quantities, or maybe even they were overprinted muestra to make them postally unusable and then sold to collectors. That it's also possible. That's, by the way, something that the US Post Office did. They would overprint stamps, not wrappers, but stamps with things like sample, words like sample, and then sell them to collectors. So the Argentinians might have done something similar. I did do some research in the literature, but didn't come up with anything until now. Finally, this is the last one that we have. This is a Belgian wrapper of a printed specimen. However, Belgium never issued wrappers, postal wrappers. So the thinking is that these were wrappers that are really essays. Presumably, Belgium intended to issue wrappers and prepared these as essays, and also they were printed them as specimens for possible distribution, but later, for whatever reasons, they never issued the wrappers themselves. I am tempted to say that these are not unissued wrappers as such, because when you have a stamp typically and it is not issued, almost invariably you find that there are a number of copies out in collector hands. Somebody somehow you know, takes out those stamps and finds a way of selling them to collectors. So you have stamps that are unissued, that are scarce or rare. With wrappers, with these Belgian wrappers, I have never come across a Belgian wrapper that doesn't have the specimen overprint. So presumably they never made it out if they were printed. So I believe what they did is they just printed a small number of these, even though they are very elaborate in terms of the indicia are quite elaborate. They printed, I think, only a small quantity to use indeed only as essays and for trial purposes. So this completes my presentation. Thank you for sitting through it patiently. So now I wonder if there are any questions that you have that I might or might not be able to answer.
Well, thank you very much, Cemil. Very, very interesting. Appreciate it. Always having coming back. Folks, questions that you may have? I got one. I'll start up. I guess, with covers, so much gets thrown out. People get their letter, they read it, and they throw it out. Is the fatality of wrappers even more than covers?
Absolutely, no question about that.
Yeah.
However, you have also to remember that wrappers were often used in very large quantities, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and some people invariably, kept them. So most of the used wrappers that you will find today are actually torn and folded neatly to display just the front,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
But you have to get used to it that, when you buy a wrapper, it's not something that is neat like a stamp. If it is a used wrapper, unless the recipient has carefully removed the inside, typically it is torn, and that's it.
Mhm.
So the survival rate of wrappers is not good.
Now, I was really thinking of newspaper wrappers for newspapers, but I guess it's like anybody else. If it's printed matter, they could use the wrapper, like that Alpine Club in Austria.
Absolute. Well, actually, even more than that.
Mhm.
A wrapper, people send wrappers were very cheap. So I have an example of where the guy printed really something of the size of a postcard and
Mhm.
put it in a wrapper and send it, just, one single sheet.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
was either as cheap, if not cheaper, than sending the item itself. At least he could print his advertisement totally on both sides and still send it for 1 centime. It is a
Mhm.
French wrapper that I have.
Yeah.
There are other cases where actually people use wrappers to send nothing. What that means is that actually people would print a text into the wrapper itself. So, and then they would mail the wrapper. So they don't have even to uh, to uh, to spend for the paper, to spend money for the paper. Maybe in a future meeting of the club, I will have a show and tell where I show at some point in the US, some courts were distributing bankruptcy notices in wrappers.
Wow.
So you have cases where, you know, where inside of the wrapper it is written such and such has filed for bankruptcy, and legal text that is in there that
Yeah.
was sent out to people. It's very interesting. So
Using it as a postcard. That's amazing. That's
yeah.
yeah,
On the
folks.
wrapper, you have definitely more space than on postcard. I mean, I have seen cases where people send questionnaires on back of wrappers. Okay, so it is a cheap way to send a one-page questionnaire. You get more space than on a postcard, right? To put to print your questions in the back, right? So I can show maybe show in a future meeting in show and tell some of these examples. They are quite interesting.
I knew of a survey that they really wanted the answers, so they there was only 2 or 3 questions and they put them on the back of a check. The check was made out to the recipient. And once they signed it, and it would not be honored unless all the questions were answered, yes or no, and then it went back. So yeah, people are clever that way.
Yeah.
Folks,
It's
questions?
okay.
Questions for Cemil? That Victoria watermark, that huge. Did many wrappers have watermarks?
Yes.
We've seen a few close.
US
People look, but
US wrappers had watermarks.
okay. But are they that big?
Say it again?
Are they that big in size?
No.
Okay.
No, they are not that big, but they are a fair size. Usually, US wrappers are printed on very low quality paper, and the watermarks are really hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes they are barely visible. It makes it very difficult to identify wrappers at times.
Okay. That's because,
The-
yeah, the thick paper.
yes, yes.
Mhm.
Victoria wrappers actually have watermarks that are particularly interesting because they are really, really fancy. I've never, again, this is maybe another presentation, interesting tidbits about wrappers, and certainly Victoria watermarks are interesting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.